wildly wondrous, wide-eyed, and whimsical men and women of the World Wide Web, you have found your way to Cacophony Live. And I have the privilege of sitting with the inimitable Blag Dhalia himself of the Dwarves. Welcome to Cacophony Live.
Well, thanks for having me, bud. I appreciate it. Lots of great alliteration in there.
Yeah, a wordsmith I am, as well as a fan of music. A privilege to have you on. A lot of stuff I would love to ask you in a short amount of time, but I want to start off with probably the biggest question that a lot of Dwarves fans may have had in the past. You may have talked about it before, but never with me. So there was a shift in sound from the 90s, late 80s, early 90s to the 2000s. Can you talk a little bit about what spawned that? Like, where did you feel more open in that regard, that you could experiment more? What did that look like from your end?
So the change between when and when?
Like your late 80s, early 90s, more of a hardcore vibe. Early
Right.
2000s, there was a lot of things. You were playing with a lot of different sounds. There
Oh,
was a
right.
pop punk
Yeah.
feel. There was,
Yeah. I mean, so the first big change comes like at the beginning, the Dwarves were very like 60s garage, we played
yeah,
like, Farfisa organ and more like Paisley ties and shit. And then by 1990, when we recorded Blood Guts, we were very much like a hardcore band.
yeah,
So that was one sort of big change. Although to me, it was always just rock and roll. It was a question of like I would go to shows and play, and I felt like this isn't like modern enough. This isn't like strong enough. There's something about this isn't feeling right. And like the whole, I'd grown up going to punk shows, and I was never that into the music, but or certain bands. I loved the Misfits and Black Flag, but a lot of hardcore bands were just mediocre. But it was the fun in the room. It was the wild behavior. It was the slam dancing and stage diving and all that. When we started, we were more like 60s influence, like rockabilly bands and 60s garage bands. But then when you'd hang out with those bands, it was all like, are you wearing the right outfit? Do you have the perfect vintage guitar or whatever it was? I was just like, these people are bananas. Like, I like the music, but I'm not trying to play dress up here like I'm at Harajuku Park in Japan. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm trying to be now. And so that was kind of the first switch. And then, as we started making records, and especially with Blood Guts, I really liked Blood Guts and thought it was a really good record and it did what it was trying to do. But it's still, I felt in my mind like there was a difference between my records and records I liked to listen to.
okay,
And I sort of liked my records conceptually, but I didn't really like listening to them yet. And when I met Eric Valentine was when we were, which was just by random chance. He was just a guy with a studio and he wasn't a big producer yet. And then I started making what became The Dwarves Are Young and Good Looking and realizing like, wow, this guy's really good. Maybe he can help me get to where I'm trying to get as far as what my shit sounds like. So he didn't produce us like in terms of like pre-production working on your songs and all that stuff, but he
yeah,
just sonically showed me a different way. And so from Young and Good Looking on, it gets more and more like well produced.
yeah,
So then after a while, this other question comes up of like, is your shit too clean now? Are you just too clean and not dirty enough? And it was like, no, because it was just more like, well, you can hear the drums, but the guitars are still sick and they're loud enough. And
yeah,
a lot of it came down to like starting to understand things about sonics and understand how you could have something that didn't sound all clean and polished, but that just was good sonically.
yeah.
And so that was part of the change. And the other part of the change was just not wanting to do the same thing over and over again.
Sure.
And also never really being that successful. So it was like, you have to do this. A lot of bands, it's like they hit with a particular thing. And it's like, well, that's what your fans want, you
Yeah.
know? And I didn't really care what my fans wanted because we didn't have that many of them. And it was just more like, well, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. I totally
And
get that. And what you said about trying to translate the energy and the fun of a hardcore show onto a record, I can speak firsthand about even trying to articulate what that show is like from a literary perspective. Like there's a palpable energy that you just can't translate onto paper or vinyl. So I can definitely see what you're saying there. Although I have to say that I think part of the fun of the Dwarves, at least for, the fan, the listener on this end of the call, was the fact that it was hypersexual, hyper violent. Like it just felt like the bare bones of what everyone was afraid of rock and roll. Like you listen to Maiden
Right.
because it had the scary covers, and you listen to hardcore because it scared your parents. But the Dwarves kind of encapsulated all of the scary fun of rock and roll and like turned it up with nitrous oxide.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to describe it. And I'm glad that it struck you that way because that's what we were trying to do. And we didn't have a lot of help. So we sort of did the best we could with what we had. Part of why it came off so bare bones was because we didn't have any money behind us. We didn't own any gear. We worked
Yeah.
day jobs and none of us were like artistic guys in terms of like some bands had like, oh, I'm really into like lights, or I'm really into making t-shirts, or I'm really into making posters. And we just didn't have a lot of that. So everything became very bare bones because it was like, well, this is all we got.
Yeah. And
And
that there's a rawness there that, even in the, and I always like to call it more of the pop punk sound, in the like 2004 kind of era of the Dwarves. It was still raw in the sense where it felt still like you were listening to you guys. It didn't feel like
yeah,
you got away from the Dwarves. Um, Let me tell you about my first experience with the Dwarves, and this is something I was talking to you, or I was kind of alluding to a little bit before we started recording. So, 1993, I am a sophomore in high school, and I am discovering punk music, and I couldn't help. It was 1993. I was living outside of Philadelphia, and I couldn't help but hear that there might be a scandal with a member of the Dwarves in Philadelphia. Can you talk about said scandal?
yeah. I mean, it's so funny the things that influence you, right? Because he who cannot be named, of course, died in a bar fight in Philadelphia. And part of that came from W.C. Fields' famous line, which was, on the whole, I'd rather be in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, if I have to be in Philadelphia, I'd rather be dead, right? That was the joke. And so it's kind of extrapolated off that, like, okay, we want this guy to die, so where should he die? And I just thought, Philadelphia, it's perfect. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know where I was going with that. Was there a question in there? What was the
No, I just wanted you to expound on the story. That's all. Because I mean, for he who cannot be named, for those of you that are just discovering the Dwarves, famously in a Rey Mysterio lucha libre mask on stage, suffered a gruesome fate in 1993, and that's really I having lived through that as the viewer, as the teen during that moment in time. I thought it was just kind of funny to kind of hear more about it on my end.
Oh, I'm
Speaking.
sorry, man. I lost you there for a minute. It's raining here, and the
Oh yeah, yeah.
internet,
No,
the internet can be kind of weird. So you were asking me about
yeah,
Philadelphia.
I wanted you just to kind of expound on that a little bit more because from the other side of the coin, I remember hearing, I think somebody died in Philly. I think it was somebody from the Dwarves because I'm living in like right outside of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It's right across the water, and I'm a sophomore in high school, hanging out with people that are now talking punk music. So my first introduction to you guys as a sophomore was that news story.
Yeah, if I would have said, if we would have said New York or LA, people kind of would have known it was bullshit pretty quickly. We made it like Philly because it was like, oh, things are more obscure there and they're not, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
everybody knows what's happening in Philly kind of shit. But yeah, and it was always a place. I think when we first went there, we met that band, the Serial Killers from Philly, and we hung out and we played kind of a notorious show at a place called the Khyber Pass. That was a Philly spot. And yeah, so, but it was pretty random how we came about with the whole Philly thing.
It was pretty funny. It was a pretty once I was old enough to kind of like read and get the joke. I it was brilliant. Um, So speaking of, sophomore 1993, yeah. So that kind of puts me towards the end of Gen X. Let's talk about millennials because they may know you from a completely different avenue of entertainment.
Right.
Please tell me about your
SpongeBob.
connection to SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah, so Saltpeter, kind of, our original bass player, my good friend, he was friendly with the wife of the guy who started SpongeBob. And SpongeBob was by no means like an assured success at the beginning. The first season of it, Nickelodeon didn't know if it was people were going to like it or how it was going to go. They didn't have much of a budget. Sorry, I have a cough here. Um, so they had a very low budget and they kind of wanted their songs on there to sound kind of 4-track and low budget. And Saltpeter used to make these low budget 4-track sounding demo things.
Okay.
And so they asked him, can you write a song for us? We want you to write a song, and we kind of want it to sound like the Cramps and a dance craze called "Do the Sponge."
To the sponge, correct.
So after he wrote it and demoed it, they said, "Well, can you get somebody that'll kind of sing this like the guy from the Cramps?" And he said, "Well, I know the perfect guy." I was hugely influenced by the Cramps, and so I went in there and saying "Do the Sponge, do the Sponge," and it was kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
I put my Lux Interior voice on, and of course, after that first season, the show became enormous, and Saltpeter kept writing for them, but I never got to perform anything. I think they actually got Lux to sing something the next year.
That's really
Um,
cool.
yeah, the Cramps were a huge influence on the Dwarves. Cramps and the Ramones and the Misfits and those kind of groups.
What about, that's, that brings me to a really good point. One of the things that, early on I knew about the Dwarves was just the show was just it was fights, it was gore, it was fun, it was loud, it was intense. Did you ever have any kind of like a deep rooted influence with folks like the Dead Boys or Iggy Pop or Gigi Allen? I mean, to kind of get that vibe, or was that something that you just kind of discovered on your own?
Well, all three of those groups were huge influences on me. The Dead Boys, um, it took a while for that influence to come into the Dwarves, and that was more kind of the Alice Cooper side of things. Once we started working more with lead guitar and that types of things, then you hear more elements of like Dead Boys, Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
What was the other group you said?
Gigi Allen,
Well, of course, Gigi.
famous permanent resident of the St. Mark's Hotel, Gigi Allen.
Yeah, I mean, we were huge fans. I had a cassette by him called "Hated in the Nation," and that was a big influence on me and Saltpeter and the whole group. Then we went and visited Gigi in maximum security prison in Michigan. We were on one of our first tours, and we were driving through Michigan, and we took took a detour, went to see him. He had his head all shaved. He wanted people to think he had AIDS, so he shaved it in patches. I mean, it wasn't like anything I had ever experienced.
Yeah.
Really crazy. And then we were supposed to play with Gigi, and he came to my house with his band. I had told him they could stay the night. This was in San Francisco. It might have been 1990 or so, maybe 91. I'm not sure. But they had to cancel because Gigi became very ill from blood poisoning. He had hurt himself, I think, the night before. And so I got all pissed off that they canceled. Back then, I mean, now I'd be more understanding about things, but at the time, it was like, you do not cancel a Dwarf show. I don't give a fuck who you are. So we, I threw them out of the house, and so then they didn't like me. And then a few days later, they actually did put together a show, and I went down there, and Gigi seemed fine with me, but his band was all pissed at me. And then, he attacked this chick, and he did all this crazy shit. He shit all over himself. The whole place reeked of it. I mean, it was like a classic Gigi, attack on the audience kind of thing. And I found it fascinating, but I thought he was a clever guy that wrote funny little, like, sort of Ramones parody kind of songs with really funny lyrics. And so, yeah, he was another huge influence on us. I don't know who the third band you mentioned.
Iggy Pop, I was talking about.
Well, Iggy, I mean, he's just the godfather of punk rock and the coolest looking guy, coolest sounding guy ever. I mean, he's Iggy.
Self-proclaimed inventor of the stage dive, Iggy Pop.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he did. I mean, he's just a legendary. It's funny when English guys try and act like they invented punk, and you're just like, dude. I mean, not only did we have all those 60s garage groups that kind of set the blueprint for the
Yeah,
bands, but then you get these guys like Iggy and the Modern Lovers and the New York Dolls and the
yeah.
Tubes and Alice Cooper and all of these groups that kind of set the stage for everything. And then the Ramones come and really crystallize exactly what a punk band is. And
No, hands down.
from there you start to get these British bands that are great. You know, I like the Pistols and the Clash and the Damned and these various bands, but it's like
Do you have an opinion either way on the
it's hilarious when they act like they came up with this thing
Yeah.
when it's just so obvious.
No, it's definitely an American thing, and I would you can weigh the timeline in on that. I mean, if you were just to break down when the Pistols came out, when the Clash came out against Stooges, against the Ramones, against the MC5, I mean, like any one
Right.
of those. Do you have an opinion either way on the current lineup of the Pistols?
Well, why? What is the current lineup?
Well, they're touring without Johnny Rotten.
uh,
So
I mean, so I have mixed feelings about all this stuff. I mean, look, people need money. They go out, they play. The Sex Pistols, in particular, are a group that made one record, And so, again, even at that, when you compare them to the Ramones, it's just like there's no comparison, or the Damned, who made many records with
yeah,
various styles. I mean, the Pistols made one record. It's a great record, but it's for them to come back and play it all is kind of a joke. I saw them about maybe 15 years ago or something when they came back with a thing, and they were giving away tickets. Nobody
yeah,
wanted to see it, and I went there and I saw why. It was terrible. I mean, and I struggle with that because I'm an old guy in an old punk band, and I come out and play, and I think, okay, are we sucking like when I saw the Sex Pistols and they sucked, or like I've seen a lot of punk bands that sucked? I'd like to think no. I think
yeah.
we're still energetic and fun, and we put on a good show, but we still have bad nights sometimes. And I could see somebody going out and going, "Oh, geez, these guys." But I think in the main, the whole thing that keeps you current is I always just go by what the hip hop guys say. You're only funky as your last joint.
Yeah.
You got to make a
So they
good
have Frank
record.
Carter fronting the current lineup, and they're coming to America in September. They're kind of touring England right now and the surrounding area. But I'm of the opinion that without Sid Vicious or Johnny Rotten, it's really not the Sex Pistols anyway. Like I just don't I working for a music magazine, I will assuredly see the show. But I was listening to an interview with Johnny not too long ago where he said it's kind of like a Sex Pistols cover band. And I kind of have to agree, at least on paper. That's what it looks like to me. Speaking of things that are coming up, you have an album dropping April 12th. Tell me about it.
So yeah, sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows, and it's been a long time coming. I mean, basically, we have a few albums that have sort of become iconic, and the first one was Blood, Guts, and Pussy,
Yeah.
recorded in Seattle. It was either late 1989 or early 1990, and it came out in 1990. And it's got that famous cover with the dwarf and the two girls, and they're covered in blood. And it's a very minimalistic album in terms of what the music's like, what the production's like, and even the art. Like, there's that one picture, and that's it. And then on
Yeah.
the back, there's sort of a confused looking live shot of us, and that's it. You don't get any information much about what that album is. And that's part of what made it a great record. But when I got my records returned to me from the assholes that had them, I found this tape and remembered, oh, yeah, when we first went up there in 1989, they asked us to record a single, and we went in and did 14 songs. So two of the songs became that single, but the other 12 of them just got forgotten. And then we went and did Blood Guts. And so those songs were never heard. And when I went back and listened to it, it was a very interesting recording because it wasn't done the way Blood Guts was and the way most of the records then were done, which was the whole band played to get the drums and then everybody overdubbed.
Yeah.
So this Sunshine Lollipops are just us, the four of us, like we were live, all playing live and me singing live. And
Oh, so
so it's
this
really,
is really just a callback to the very beginning. Like this
yeah.
is a real raw. So this drops April 12th, but you start a tour. Is it April 12th as well, or is it the 13th that you kick off?
We're doing that weekend. So the
Okay.
11th we play near San Diego, and the 12th we do Punk in the Park in Arizona.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And then
Okay.
on the 13th we go to Costa Mesa, I think, and then we have a week off, and then the tour really starts, which is with I Hate God, which is a great kind of metal stoner type of band from New Orleans, and they were nice enough to let us support them. And so we're going to be promoting that record then on the West Coast and going around with I Hate God, which I'm really looking forward to. And we'll hit all the West Coast cities, the bigger cities, and so yeah, a lot of shows. There's 12 shows in April. Then we take some time off, but then we start up again in July, and we're in Denver for Punk in the Park, and we do a bunch of shows around Denver, and then we go to the East Coast, that Savage Mountain Punk Festival in Maryland that they do, and playing a bunch of East Coast shows, and then more Punk in the Park. So it's shaping up to be a pretty busy summer. But we get some time off before that, which will be nice. But yeah, Sunshine Lollipops is like, it's really a different record than Blood Guts. But I went for, instead of the minimal art package, the maximal art package. So went back to that old photo shoot from Blood Guts that's so famous, and
Yeah.
grabbed a bunch of other great shots from there
Oh,
that are the
that's great.
cover. We made it a picture disc, so you get another shot from it. Then I went back to my Charles Peterson, who had shot a lot of those live things, and got a bunch of those shots. And so it's just a cool kind of Maximus package that also has liner notes from the band. So Saltpeter and Badge Moore and me, we all talk about what was going on at that time. So you kind of get for people who really love Blood Guts, but it's very minimal and you don't really get a story behind it. This is kind of the story of that with all
Yeah.
different recordings, So I really think it's worth getting, not, for record heads, of course, but for any Dwarves fan, if you love Blood Guts, you really need this.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And like, I can't wait to check you guys out when you hit the Northeast. I'm excited to come to my very first Dwarves show in my life.
I think we're
Uh,
in Portland on the 29th of April, and then the 30th is Seattle, and then the first we're in Eugene. So
uh,
yeah, we got some Northwest with I Hate God. Should be a great like heavy metal thrash kind of punk rock show.
do you miss? Do you miss the fighting? Do you miss the aggression? Like, do you find that it's more? There's less anxiety going town to town when you don't have to worry about so much aggression on a night-to-night
Yeah,
basis.
I mean, I'm not that sentimental about things. And again, it's that you're only funky as your last joint. I try and not be like, oh, gee, I miss the good old days. The other thing is that I was more physically able to handle it then.
Yeah, yeah, okay,
You
I can
get
understand that as
you
well. It's a
get to be
lot.
my age. It's hard to take a punch or a kick in the face or getting strangled. All kinds of shit happened to me. So I'm happy with where things are at. I think the scene. I think punk rock, like all things, but especially punk rock, it really didn't start as a musical genre. It started as a way of doing things. And if you look at the earliest punk bands, it's like they're not very musically similar. So
Yeah,
the Blondie and the Talking Heads and the Ramones and Suicide, it's like four completely different groups, but they all played at this club and they all kind of did it themselves. And so that's kind of I think young people are missing out on that. They're
yeah.
more like, okay, I know how to be in a punk band, and the punk band I like is Bad Religion, so I'm going to look like that, or I like the Dwarves, I'm going to go do that. And really, that's not, what punk rock is to
It's
me.
not punk
Punk
at
rock to
all.
me was like the losers getting together and going, if they're going to shut us out of everything, we're just going to do this.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it means to me.
So
And how
the spirit of it is still very much there, and I have to tell you that there, from the umpteen amounts of shows that I get to go see, there is a newfound appreciation for the punk bands that are still out there grinding. I see it time and time again. I see teens at shows that know all the words to all of the classic songs and
yeah.
know all of these bands from 20, 30 years ago. There's like a punk renaissance happening on the street level that I see, and I'm here for it. I hopefully it spawns some great new artists.
Yeah, I love that. And I hope they go and listen to Dwarves records and get a kick out of them. And I hope each different one hits them in a different way. I hope they understand kind of where we went. We tried to evolve without getting lame, which is a hard thing to do. Usually, most people's evolution just means, okay, we got slower, and then we got slower, and then we got slower. We got cleaner, and then we got cleaner, and then we got cleaner. And I think with the Dwarves, it was more like incorporating all of these different styles. Be like, oh, people are sequencing drums and now, and people are making like these thrash metal records. Oh, let's do that. Or people are making these records that are harkening back to garage rock. Well, let's do that. We used to do that. Or let's make a record that's electro that has processed drums in it and does things that way. And so we tried to do that. And then at a certain point, it was like, let's do it all on every record. Let's like have all this genre jumping on every record and see where we go. And that to me is kind of the story of the last like 20, 25 years of the Dwarves, is like these records that if you only like hardcore, then there's still something for you in there. And
Sure.
if you only like, thrash, there's something for you in there. If you like more melody and pop punk or garage rock, you got that. So it's that's what I'm shooting for, is to always try and do something interesting for myself, and hopefully the audience gets that and comes along for the ride.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And most importantly, the fun of it. There's definitely the fun aspect. If the
Yeah,
Ramones can be cited as more than just eighth notes on the downstroke, they brought fun back to rock and roll at a time when it was very serious.
absolutely.
The Dwarves can definitely say that they carry that flag even today. And I can safely say
Yeah.
you brought up the Cramps as big influences. The Cramps, Surfing Bird, motherfucker. I'm going
Oh yeah.
motherfuckers.
Oh, absolutely. Well, in fact, in the liner notes on this Sunshine, when we were talking about motherfucker, I say, Saltpeter wrote that song, motherfucker. But then I threw in that Papa Mau Mau. And of course, I got it not from the Cramps, but I got it from where they got it from, which was Surfing Bird.
Yeah,
But even Surfing Bird is a cover of the Rivingtons,
yeah.
who are an R&B group. It's really funny how rock and roll just eats itself constantly and comes out with this new package.
Yeah.
Because my whole thing was motherfucker. It's like, isn't that funny?
Hysterical.
We're doing Papa Umau, and I don't think anybody in the '60s would have thought of that.
No,
So
but that,
kind of like,
but that's the level of fun that people can still have at these shows. So these folks can check you out. West Coast tour first, starting in Arizona, going through California, into Oregon, Washington, Colorado. Then you're gonna take a break, hit the East Coast, starting in Maryland. You got some festivals and some tour dates heading up the Northeast. Hopefully, I will get a chance to see you on that leg of the tour. And you have this album dropping April 12th, which is going to be interesting to hear a step back to basics, some raw recordings that fell through the cracks in the test of time, and now they're back. I'm excited about that.
yeah.
What message do you want to shout out to the next generation of punk fans? What should they be doing? What should they be looking out
Well,
for? And
oh,
who should they be listening to?
well, we can get to that, but starting with just me, which is my favorite subject. I had created a character a couple of years ago called Ralph Champagne and put out a record. And the idea with that was to jump around a lot in genres, but whereas the Dwarves do that with all the hard genres, thrash and punk and garage, Ralph Champagne kind of does it with country and Americana and lounge and novelty songs and humor songs. So I've been working on that. So this Sunshine record was, I had finished that a year ago and moved on to the, now it's coming out.
Yeah.
But the Ralph Champagne record, I'm putting out like a Christmas record with
Okay.
a version of the Grinch and some other things, and it's going to be very interesting. I just keep going. I try and expand in all directions. That's what I try and do. And I think my advice to young bands, or what you're trying to do, is own your own shit. Don't worry about record labels. Just, if you got to use a record label, just license your shit to them.
Yeah.
Understand that term license as opposed to getting signed. Getting signed sucks. Licensing is good.
Okay.
And try and keep control of your stuff. Because the reason nobody's hearing Sunshine Lollipops till 35 years after we recorded it is because a bunch of assholes hung on to it and did nothing with it for 35 years. That's what getting signed gets you. So just keep your own shit, keep control of your own stuff, and don't worry about who buys it or who likes it, as long as you like it.
Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, Blag Dhalia, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your art, and we look forward to seeing you on the road. Okay, all you wildly wondrous, wide-eyed, and whimsical men and women of the World Wide Web, don't forget to go to thedwarves.com. Tickets are available now for their spring and summer tour. Also, and further, don't forget to check out the new live album, Sunshine, Lollipops, and Rainbows, available on thedwarves.com and at a local record dealer near you.